So this is the last treat of this session. I get to interview two of Africa's most dynamic business leaders. I'm quite excited about this. Bob Collymore is the CEO of Safaricom, which is, it's not just the leading cell phone provider in Kenya. It has pioneered mobile payments for the world to really an astonishing degree. I think 40%, I read, of Kenya's GDP now goes through M-Pesa. It's incredible. Joshua Oigara is the CEO of the KCB Bank Group, which is, I think, both the oldest and the biggest indigenous bank in East Africa. And he's led the charge in making mobile banking a reality for 5 million customers. But more than their business success, both men have built reputations for standing for something, for progressive views on business, for battling corruption, and they've inspired many other business leaders around the continent. So it's a real honor to welcome Bob and Joshua up to the stage here.
You know, you forgot to say that he is actually the youngest CEO of the oldest bank in East Africa.
The youngest CEO of the oldest bank. And so we're going to explore some of the deepest, most provocative questions about business, and also your own relationship. You know each other quite well, and advice that you have for the fellows here. But I think let's just start with business. You know, so many people think of business in ambiguous terms as a morally ambiguous force in the world. You've both sought to bring purpose to business. Is that even possible? A business is there to make money for its shareholders. How do you make business something of value to society? I'll start with you, Bob.
I like to think of myself as a little bit of an activist capitalist, if you like, because I don't believe there's a choice. You can run a short-term business, and the example that I usually give is that, you know, if you, as a shareholder, you want me to give you the best return for your money, I could actually get into drug running, and I'm guessing that drug running actually delivers quite a good return, or human trafficking, and you'll say no, you don't want to do that. And so now we've established that there are principles. Now we just need to establish where we draw the principles. And so I say that, you know, to run a business only to return capital to shareholders is clearly flawed. It has to be broader than that. And, you know, as a company, we tend to look at, a range of 8 stakeholders, and we have to deliver to each one of those.
Josh, how would you frame that?
I mean, I would say it's an element of moral courage, going beyond what really you're looking at the stakeholders for your business. But for us, it's very intrinsic. You know, we've been in this market for over 120 years. We started very far in Zanzibar, building the railways. And at that time, that was the first thing to do. But when I look at the challenges we see, and it's a real, difficulties that business leaders face, is that there is always a centric focus on the short term. And therefore, we focus on where we are. And we forget about the stakeholders, the communities, the people that we work with, who are actually the reason that we have a businesses to run. And so more and more we are seeing leaders pushing the frontier on that conversations, and Safaricom and ourselves have been the forefront, challenging even shareholders and being quite tough on that conversation. And even as you do, even for younger business, and especially now, I'm more excited about this team. Because for younger entrepreneurs, you've got a bigger chance to build a business that goes beyond the short-term gains. What I know for sure is that there are very few businesses that are successful which has focused. I don't know any business, just to be correct, that has been successful being short-term.
I think shareholders are the toughest stakeholders to work with, because by and large, they only look for returns at the end of the year. And even when you talk to pension funds, a very good friend of mine, Sharon Burrows, who's the Secretary General of the International Trade Union Confederation, she says, it's the workers' money. I said, yeah, but Sharon, actually, it's some young analyst who's making the decision. So shareholders is the toughest barrier to jump over.
But is one way where you can get more alignment between purpose and business mission through the lens of employees? I mean, how much difference has it made to your recruiting ability to hire and retain great people, to plant this flag in the ground and say, no, we stand for more than just money making?
I think there's some young people who want you to stand for more than just money making. But again, I have a bit of a problem with the whole millennials, and I tend to go with the Simon Sinek approach, which is it does tend to be a little bit narcissistic, self-obsessed. So I don't want to say that's the way millennials are, but I'm saying that young people, particularly our children, whether it's Abby, his daughter or mine, they're now demanding much more of us. And so as we move into that next generation, unless we're doing the right thing, it's going to be very difficult to hold them.
I mean, Josh, what kind of pushback have you had from, say, investors about your approach? Do you run into trouble often over that?
Quite a lot. But before I answer that question, let me say that part of the greatest challenges I face, Bob knows my family quite well. So my daughter Abby asked me, she's 12, she asked me, Daddy, what are you doing as a CEO of the largest bank about climate change? I mean, what exactly? And this is a question she always asks, and she says, I want to see the head of state and give him a letter about what exactly you're doing and what the country is doing. At that age, so we tend to be looking for people today in recruitment beyond just what they have on the piece of paper. People with a sense of purpose is very personal. It's not something you're going to acquire. You're going to be able to believe about something. But our greatest challenge is we were in New York one time and speaking to shareholders at the NYC, and they were saying, look, you're going to focus on the quarter. Banks, naturally, people look at quarter-to-quarter results. And I was saying, I don't need those shareholders. You can look for another bank. And there are many other banks globally where you can invest in. But our own this was one of the most difficult and chaotic conversations I had with investors. And it was looking like, it's a battle for the CEO against the investors. But you know what? 2 or 3 years down the line, we now have shareholders that are looking for 10, 20-year horizon investment in our business. So you're going to be very bold. But I think over time is to see more and more bullishness on leaders to select. So we are not a company that targets short-term investors. We say no. And in reality, in this market, there are few opportunities. So I would say that remains one of the greatest challenges in getting businesses to progress on focus and getting short-term returns.
Many of the people in this room are trying to build businesses pretty much at the base of the pyramid, where customers have no money, etc. Does that impose a unique set of challenges that the market is not properly looking after?
I think it gives us a unique set of opportunities. We've built our business on that so-called bottom of the pyramid. Actually, I don't like that phrase, but let's use it for the time being. So when we launched things like M-Pesa, most of the banks said, why would we bother with that? Because, we're making a shilling, 2 shillings, 3 shillings at a time. But because we look at it through a different lens, we don't say how can we make money out of those people. We say how can we transform their lives. Similarly, the fellow next to me says, how can we transform Africa? And we start with a purpose of making a positive difference in their lives, not how do we make money for you as a shareholder.
But arguably, in the cell phone business specifically, that is a product that the poor really want and need, and there's almost like an immediate benefit to them. Some of the other businesses that people work on, perhaps around health or housing or energy, are harder to be afforded immediately.
Yeah, so if you take refugees, for example, Agnes talked about being a refugee when she was young. Refugees have very little, but actually they have a cell phone. And we say, how can we deal with this issue of food distribution? So the World Food Program buys the food, usually probably grown in America, flies it over to the refugee camp, to the refugee country, drives it. The middleman corrupts it, and so by the time it finally gets to the refugee who's standing in the heat waiting for the food, the value is lost, right? It costs the World Food Program a lot of money. So we say, how can we fix that problem? And so we've used M-Pesa and the mobile phone to deliver it directly onto the handset, because we simply don't believe that any child should have to watch their parent beg for food. We think that is fundamentally wrong. But actually, you know what? We also make money out of that. So the World Food Program saves. The refugee has their dignity restored to them, and we have a sustainable business.
Josh, does your bank, with its long-term view, extend that to some of the financial instruments you offer? Like, do you offer businesses long-term, patient capital, if you like, to build businesses in some of these tougher areas?
Chris, I would say that one of the things I love about the Acumen Fellows, and speaking to Jacqueline many times, is the role of partnership in making this kind of difficulties into possibilities. And we worked very closely with M-Pesa, with Bob here, in building a mobile algorithm really that creates access of credit to entrepreneurs and especially individuals. Now, I give you some data that you can see the difference about dealing with a lot of people who have no access. So if you look at the banking sector today in this market, roughly you've got 20 million customers that can borrow. Of those, nearly more than 60% borrow on the mobile platform. They borrow really on the back of M-Pesa. And these customers had no access whatsoever completely. They may be borrowing $20 or $30. And for them, it's a big amount between life and change. So the dignity that you create in those investments, and we make business out of it. So that is where we're going to change to build solutions. It will never have worked if we didn't have a partnership. And some of the really innovative, listening today to normal speakers this morning, none of these breakthroughs can be made by being singular and saying I can do it alone. There are many people out there that you need to collaborate, learn more, engage more, deal with your greatest fears. And many times we are so afraid of failure. I always say, and of course for Acumen Fellows, this is not the case. But I would say without partnership, largely organizations cannot uplift. And we're so much worried. Bob and I speak about this, is it about Bob or myself? Is it about M-Pesa or KCB? We always fight with these things. It's you or myself. What we want to do is to bring in both together. Bob talks about, the all contrarian. What are you going to stand for? And businesses lose this opportunity, especially young entrepreneurs, and say, I will die with this alone. What we see in our partnership is that energy and synergy brings in a third alternative. And now we've got nearly $200 million of small loans for farmers or for individuals who never had any access a year ago.
Now, 15 months ago or so, the two of you took a bold decision together to publish your salaries and your net assets, your personal net assets. Why on earth did you do that?
A moment of stupidity, I think. I think Josh and I, we talked about it actually many months before that, because we just believe that transparency is the right thing, and we live in a culture which is corruption is pretty rife. I mean, let me not beat about the bush. And corporate leaders are setting bad examples, and often, Agnes, you talked about ministers and politicians not having the right kind of moral compass. Actually, business leaders don't have the right compass, and business leaders are the place where wealth is created. And we found that we were setting the bad example for young people. For the fellows in this room, for the people who are not in this room, we were setting a very bad example, because success was measured by how many farms you owned and how many cars you had or how many helicopters you had. And so, we sat down, and in a moment of idleness, we said, why don't we just declare, and we can show people how much money we have or how much we don't have and how much we're earning. And shareholders have a chance of saying that we're paying these guys too much, or unlikely to be saying too little. And so we then got a bit of, I think he let me down badly, because I declared, and he was in Ethiopia at the time, and so my declaration went out a few hours before his. And then his came out, and he was earning less than me, and I thought, oh crap, you could have given me a bit of a heads up. So I was slightly embarrassed about that. But actually,
but that's the whole point, right?
It was. We had tried to build a bit of a coalition of other leaders who would do the same, and they promised us that they would. And then what happened, Josh?
Nobody else came along, actually, at all. So we ended up looking at the clowns in this. But I believe the lesson is very strong, that this is a question about moral courage. I mean, and we speak about this about Acumen Fellows for many years, that you're going to be able to have the courage to do something that has a general good beyond yourself, even if it has a personal impact, that even if it will injure your own standing in your life and in society. And that's what moral courage you build on. So this is one of that measure. Of course, the journalist went up and wrote all funny stories about how we never managed our funds, how we, many things.
I didn't manage my funds, because at my ripe old age, I had
You
less
beat
money.
him on assets.
So there was this kind of debate. But I think that transparency is important. And I would challenge as you build a young entrepreneur, you're building a young business with an impact in society, it's important to make those bold steps. Those bold moves will create change. And I can assure you, without those moves, we will never make progress in our businesses.
But then we didn't give up, right? So they did laugh, and we did have a lot of cartoons and a lot of front-page headlines. But we said, okay, fine. You know what we'll do? We'll now support regulatory change. And so now we'll force everyone to do it. In the same way, when we looked at the legal framework here in Kenya, there was no law against bribery. There's no law against private sector bribery. And so we said, to hell. You know, actually, there are lots of examples of the British anti-bribery law and the FCPA were good models we can use. And so we said, we'll change the law. And so a few of us, maybe 10 of us, decided to write the law. We wrote the law, and it's actually now been enacted. And so we'll finally get to those guys.
So let's dig in here a little deeper, because I'd love you each to give a sense of what corruption actually looks like in modern business life in Africa. I mean, it's a worldwide problem, actually. But what does it actually look like now? How does it rear its head?
Well, you know, I always say that in our kind of cultures, it's very hard to define some words like corruption. But what we see is in our case, is that every single business is destroyed completely, and especially for the startups. Just 3 weeks ago, we were speaking around this in Nairobi, where a young entrepreneur came and said, you know, it's what Jacqueline raised. I set up my businesses, I know how to do it, but all my friends who paid something have progressed, and I've lost all my businesses. The chance of failure for that business is nearly 100%. And so what you're building is a network of organizations like KCB and Safaricom and others to go out for those organizations, because we cannot credit and work with themselves. But every day, you know, I've gotten someone who came to me personally. So I have cases and saying, George, this business is, if you want to do with us, you're going to pay us X. And if you don't do it, at my level as a group CEO of the institutions, you're out of business. Of course, I said you can take a walk. And in reality, it took a walk. Now, as a large business, we can deal with that. But for a startup business, I think it's much more to be prepared on how to deal with these issues in your environment. So it is more difficult, especially from a personal basis where we faced. But over time, we've been able to be very firm and clear. And now with the law that is in place, we are seeing those kind of opportunities.
But it puts the onus on businesses like ours, because we're two of the largest businesses in East Africa, I think. And if we are not going to stand up for it, then the small, medium-sized business will never be able to stand up for it. And that's why, you know, if you're the eldest in the family, then it is your responsibility for setting the tone, and I think that's what we're doing.
What was the last time?
I mean, just one thing that is important that Bob did not mention is when you stand up for the fight, they always say the corruption fights back. So Bob has been fought a lot. And I like what Ray just talked about earlier, is that you have a lot of network here that it should be important to stand firm. When you're trying to do right, most likely you're trying to be contrarian. So you get fights. And I can't imagine how many times Bob has been, for doing what is right. I mean, every single story today to discredit the work that you've done is targeted because of the change that he's trying to create. So it's better to be aware and have the energy and the network of friends that support the delivery. Otherwise, when you talk about being very alone, it's very possible to find yourself actually physically or mentally on your own and fail to achieve the progress. So we provide that network.
Bob, can you tell us one recent story where, you know, you were made to feel uncomfortable, you were put in a bad position, and you fought back?
I think it's not just being made to feel uncomfortable. I mean, it can be pretty brutal, and it can attack you, and it can attack your family. And you know, I got married last year, and attacked my wife, and you know, she hasn't done anything. You know, pick on me, don't pick on her. So you know, last year, for example, we had an issue with someone who didn't win the tender, and they were determined actually to try and bring us down. And you said, look, you know, we'll bring you down, we'll get you fired. And once we get you fired, then the company will, you think, well, no, because actually what I'm doing is I'm building an institution. So whether I'm here or not, you're going to have the same problem. And, you know, they go to Parliament. And actually, it is possible for laws to be passed when you're not looking. So these guys in the banking sector, they lost the battle the other day because, you know, they refused as an industry. And, you know, Joshua was actually at the time the chairman of the Kenya Bankers Association. And he refused. He says, you know, I'm not paying. And they said, fine, will pass a law. And actually, they passed a law. They passed a law capping the interest rate bill. They're now currently trying to pass a law to break my company up. I think I will die first. And you know, the stupidity of it is if we really wanted to get into a corruption game, of course we can afford to bribe more than anyone else. Correct. Because we're richer than anybody else. Correct. And so it's stupid. But you know, the minute I get into that game, it means that every small business in this country will have a dim future. So I have to stand firm.
But I bet there's someone listening who wants to agree with all of this, but says, you know, I had this situation where I've got a company I believe in. I don't know, we were importing a product. I needed to get it out to 1,000 needy families. And how you can't risk the well-being of 1,000 needy families for the sake of a $200 bribe to a customs official or something. Is it possible to take an absolutist stance?
No, my answer might be a bit naive, and you know, we don't always have to agree. Yes. I think, you know, you cannot. Look, let me give you an example. I say I have zero tolerance to corruption or theft. And so one day, there was a firing letter, which I always sign. And I looked at it, and the guy had stolen like $1 from a customer. And I sent it back to the HR director, and I said, can we talk about this? Because it seems a bit harsh. You know, he has school fees, he has rent to pay. And Joe, the HR director at the time, came to see me, and he said, okay, you're right, but can you just clarify one thing for me? When you said zero tolerance, did you mean 0.01 or did you mean zero? And I said, give me the damn letter. And so it has to be absolute. The 200 families is actually a small price to pay for the long-term negative impact.
I mean, you two have a close relationship, and it's.
We even dress alike. Huh?
Well, down to the socks. These are the most awesome socks, and I actually.
Oh, I saw some awesome socks there. Actually.
How much has it meant to have someone you can trust in business, and is that like a key piece of advice to people here to find that person? Yes. I mean, Joshua, what's it like knowing Bob, working with him? How has he actually helped you at some point?
I mean, obviously, personally, and as a young leader, I mean, when I became CEO, you can imagine the first questions people asked. I mean, this guy is incompetent. He cannot run this largest institution. I was 36, 37, I can't remember the age. But
it was such a long time ago. He's only 40 now.
But in reality, the only person I could take a call and speak to was Bob Collymore, because ultimately he was kind of in the same situation, taking over a large company. And so I cannot underemphasize the role for a network. Businesses fail because they want to run by themselves. I know very few businesses that are individually successful. So that network gives you the energy, the protection, the defense, and the energy to be able to progress. And that is something, not just, Bob and I happen to be good personal friends. So Roger raised an issue very clear. It's not just about the business relationship. It's about to be able to understand the context of how your relationships come through. And I would not have been successful if I didn't have a personal relationship like for Bob. And it's a small network of friends. That is what I will advise for. And even when you have these difficulties about ethics and conduct, you have someone else who has been there before. And that is what the success of a relationship has been.
You know, my piece of advice, you need to get two things. You need to get a good friend, you need to get a good wife, stroke husband, stroke partner, because it really matters a lot. And many a Saturday afternoon, you know, or Friday, Joshua and I would call each other and says, what are you doing tomorrow afternoon? And we would sit and we would offload on each other. But actually, it's not just us, and it's a very small coalition. There's another one in this room here. Where is he? Ken, where are you? Stand up. So there. So Ken Olu, who I met through Acumen, is also one of our trusted, very trusted group of 4 or 5 friends who we can share those difficult moments. Sometimes they're very difficult. And so, I want to say thanks a lot to Ken, thanks a lot to Joshua, and without them, and indeed thanks to my wife, because when you get home, if you don't have that support, and there are times when my wife would hold us. There are times when we say, enough is enough. I'm not even Kenyan. I don't have to put up with this nonsense. I can just go and live in a decent country. I mean, this is a beautiful country, but I can go and live in a country which doesn't have this corruption. And he would be in the same thing sometimes. And Wambui would say, don't you even dare think about it, either of you. Either of you, because, and she's a little younger than me, as you know, and she'd say, you are setting the tone for this country that me and my children will grow up in. And so it's good that, we can hold each other to account from time to time.
I certainly think we can agree that having an awesome wife is a good thing.
She's blushing.
Last question to each of you. So here's this amazing group of people, such a diverse set of skill sets. A lot of people, starting up, building businesses of various kinds, or doing other projects, social entrepreneurs. What advice would you offer in general? I know it's hard to do that with this group, but you're wise people, your chance for a parting word.
Well, we're not wise. I'm old. I don't know what his excuse is. Actually, we're nearly the same age. I always say find your purpose. The first thing you have to do is find your purpose. And then after purpose comes the people. So surround yourself, whether they're your team or the people you work with, get the right people around you. And then my third element, of course, is profit, because if you don't have profit, you really can't afford to do any of that stuff. So you can sustain profits for sustainability, except sustainability doesn't start with a P. So purpose first, people around you, and the
sustainability. PPS, that's good. That works.
Yeah. I would say just in addition to that, it's for individuals who are setting up their own businesses. I think ultimately is to give a sense of confirmation that all greater businesses start small today, but businesses that have got a purpose in themselves run to see the next 2 or 3 generations. So you are in the right thing. You're where you are today. So sometimes you have a doubt and say it's so difficult. I don't know any easy thing ever in life. There are very few things easy in life today. So you're in the right purpose to create a change. And if you got your purpose right and you got your network together and partners, I believe that you're in the right race to create a real transformation, not just today, but for the next generation. And you are that generation today that is carrying forward the new normal for the world we're going to see. So all the very best to all the Acumen fellows today.
You two have both been wonderful partners and supporters of Acumen and indeed of this event. It's been an honor and delight to talk with you both. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you. You can stay because we're wrapping up. That's actually it for this session. Another round, I think, for the extraordinary speakers who've contributed to it. Thank you to all of you.